بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My respected elders, brothers in Islam, I'm very pleased today to introduce you to session 2 of this IPCI course on comparative religion, where we will be discussing what can best be termed as the epidemic of atheism and how to deal with it. So firstly, I'd like to commend all of you for taking the time out to come and study this basic but extremely vital information that all of us and all of the people that we are close to need to be acquainted with. And we should remind ourselves in every session that when we are here, we are seeking knowledge that's beneficial for deen. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the hadith has mentioned that that person who goes out in search of the knowledge of deen, then the angels spread their wings for him in happiness for that which he is seeking. So we should be motivated and we should understand that we are here for a purpose. Secondly, I just want to draw it to our attention that whilst last week's lecture was more about dawah, motivation, getting us on the ground, it was more of like a spiritual sort of lecture. This week's lecture is going to be more, to the point. We're going to have to focus a bit more. The content is going to be a bit more inaccessible, so to speak. So we're going to have to give it all of our attention. But inshallah, if we do this, we will learn information that will help us for the rest of our lives. Another thing, just a reminder, is that the way we're going to go about this is we're going to maybe go for about an hour till 11 o'clock, then there's going to be a 15-minute break, and then 45 minutes again. Before the break and at the end of the session, there will be a time for question and answers. So if any question comes in your mind and you're not understanding something clearly, just keep it in your mind until just before the interval or after the session, there'll be a section for question and answers. Then this applies to those who are online as well. You can type your question in the chat box and I will refer to that. Also, at the same time, those who are online, please keep your videos switched off and keep your mics muted. So inshallah, let us begin with today's session. We want to go over an overview of what we're going to be doing in today's session, so we're clear about our objectives. The first thing we're going to do is define atheism. What exactly is atheism? When we say atheist, what do we mean? When we say agnostic, what do we mean? Then we're going to go into understanding the causes of atheism. Because, it's one thing to try and deal with the symptoms of a sickness, but you want to get to the cause. You want to get to why is this happening in today's time. So we're going to go into that after that. Then we're going to look at the so-called conflict or incompatibility that is often spoken about between religion and science and whether this is true or not. Then we're going to talk about the burden of proof. When I am discussing with an atheist, who needs to bring proof, me or the atheist? So we're going to discuss that. Then we're going to go into the proofs themselves. Proofs for the existence of God, number one, and then proofs for Islam as a whole, two separate sections. And lastly, we're going to talk about morality, because in today's time it's become very common for a person to say Islam is immoral because of jihad, because of whatever other laws in Islam. And many times these people are atheists. So we need to look at how do we get to know whether something's moral or immoral. Can an atheist honestly say that something is moral or immoral? So it's a very interesting subject. So this whole lineup of topics is extremely, extremely interesting. But at the same time, more importantly, they're very, very relevant. And I'm going to stress this a few times as we go through the slides, that a lot of this content is relevant when we're dealing with our fellow Muslims, in the sense that many of them, and many of us also, have picked up certain ways of thinking that are many times in line with how certain atheists think. And we're not even aware of that. Sometimes just the way we view things, the way we think about things, the way we consider evidence, we don't realize that we've been, influenced in some way. Because a very notable scholar once told us that a worldview and a way of looking at things is like a language. A child doesn't actively go out and seek to learn his language. He just picks it up from the environment that he's in. And so too when it comes to how we view the world, our worldview, which we're going to discuss later, these things are influenced by the people around us, by the content we're taking in. So this subject material that we're going to be discussing, as much as it's extremely exciting and it's really, you'll see, it's quite interesting, but at the same time it's very relevant. So we need to make sure that we understand this correctly, inshallah. So as an introduction to the topic, I just want to make it clear historically that there have always been atheists that have been found. So in writings, 1,000, 2,000-year-old writings, you have people who were atheists who did not believe in a God. But these people were like few and far between. You had one guy here, maybe a pocket of people here, a community or so here or there. Maybe you even had an empire also. But very rarely throughout history were these people found as a solid group as they are today. That the rise of atheism as we've seen it in the last 50 years is something that appears to be, as per our current knowledge, unprecedented in history. And if you just have to take America as a case study, that in the 1950s, around 1 or 2% of the population said that they didn't identify with any religion or they didn't believe in God. Whereas if you look at the statistics now, it's over 20%. So that means they haven't doubled, they haven't tripled, they've increased by 20 times. And the reason why, and I'm mentioning this now again, is that this topic is of utmost importance, is because many Muslims today have unknowingly become much like atheists in their thought process. Now you might want to know what I mean by that. So let me just give you an example. Like 20 years ago, if you had to walk into a Jumu'ah lecture, and the person who's giving the lecture is speaking and he's talking and he's giving you a story and he's telling you a story about how there was this one man and he was very pious, and it's just, we don't know what the details of the story were, but he had a goat that could give him honey and milk, right? So at that time, no one would even bat an eyelid, they'd accept the story. Whereas in today's time, if you have to tell someone that same story, they'd be like, but how can a goat produce honey? A goat eats grass and water and the process in the stomach, it can't produce honey, it's impossible. So this line of thinking that, if science cannot explain it, then therefore it's impossible and it didn't happen, is a very dangerous line of thinking that, if not used correctly, can lead you down a very dangerous path. So we're going to discuss that. How do we take in evidence? How do we decide what's possible or impossible? All of these things are very, very important in the life of a Muslim, especially in today's time where science has taken on such a vital and pivotal role. So before we get into the science and how it's perhaps led to the increase in atheism, I think it's prudent that we define the terms. So when I say atheist, what exactly do I mean? So we're going to use the definitions that are common in the field of philosophy in today's time, and that is that an atheist, by definition, is someone who is claiming that there is no God. So he is making a truth claim. He is saying that no God exists, na'udhu billah. That's an atheist. Then on the other side, you have a theist, someone who believes in God like all of us. We are making a positive claim that a God exists. So you have an atheist and you have a theist. Then in the middle, you have someone called an agnostic. An agnostic is someone who's saying, you know what, I don't believe in a God, but neither am I saying that there's no God. I just simply don't know. If you provide me evidence for God, I'll believe. But right now, I haven't found any convincing evidence to make me believe that there is a God. So that's an agnostic. And what you're going to realize if you get into conversations with people who call themselves atheists is that the majority of them, 90% of them, are actually agnostics. Meaning they are not claiming, they are not saying there is no God. They are saying there's not enough evidence, show us the evidence and we'll believe. So therefore, even throughout this presentation, we'll be using the term atheist, but we're not actually referring to atheists. We're referring to agnostics. Agnostic is someone who's saying, I don't know. Prove to me. If you can prove to me, I'll accept it, but right now I don't believe. And this will become important later on when we're discussing the burden of proof, that who has to bring proof for his belief? Does the person who believes in God have to bring proof? Or the person who's saying, I don't know, does he have to bring proof? Or does the person who is saying that there is no God, he has to bring proof? So all of this here is important depending on your stance. So it's just important to get that clarification between an atheist who's saying that there definitely is no God, and an agnostic who's saying, I don't believe, but if you show me the evidence, then I will believe. Now let's look at the reasons for the rise in atheism. So the most common reason that you'll ever get for someone explaining to you why, if you ask them, why don't you believe in God? Why don't you believe in Islam? They'll say that there is no proof. There's no sufficient proof for me. But the question we need to ask is that 100 years ago, the proof was the same, yet why did so many people believe in religion then and so few now? So, just to sum up a very complex topic, the answer is that people's idea of what counts as evidence has changed in the last 50 years. So we can't deny that in the last 50 to 70 years, science has improved, has taken such steps forward that have been unprecedented. For example, in the medical field, you can have a heart transplant, you can have a brain transplant. If your leg, Allah protect us, comes off, they can give you a prosthetic leg. If you look in, just our cell phones, the amount of information that our cell phones can take is more than the greatest supercomputer 50 years ago. So the advancements that, and the things that scientists have discovered, for example, they've seen the planets, they've seen far-off stars, using the microscope, they've seen, the cells in our body. So they've made huge advancements, and no Muslim in his right mind would try to deny this. But what has happened as a result of that is people started placing most of their reliance on science. So because science was doing so much, was giving so much of, was producing so many results, and was giving us so much of information, people started to put more and more of their reliance on science. And the thing about science is science can only tell you about the testable world around you, about the visible world, what you can see, what you can touch, what you can smell. It can only tell you about those things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is over and above that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, na'udhu billah, cannot be tested, cannot be put into lab conditions, cannot be observed directly by our eyes in this world. So if you're going to only rely on the scientific method, then of course, if that's your only line of evidence, you're going to eventually say that there is no sufficient evidence for God. So if we have to look at it, the way it works was science progresses. Then people began to rely more on science. The more people relied on science, the more they began to see it as the only form of evidence. The more they began to see science as the only form of evidence, the more likely they are to feel that there's no evidence for God. So indirectly or directly, however you want to look at it, the progress of science has actually resulted in an increase in atheism. But this is because and only because people have not understood what constitutes evidence and what does not constitute evidence. And that's a big part of what we're going to look at in the next 5 or 6 slides. That what counts as evidence? Is it only the scientific method? Are there other forms of evidence? What about logical reasoning? What about Quran and Hadith? What about all of these things? So as a Muslim, we have a way of looking and analyzing information and deciding what counts as evidence or what doesn't count as evidence. So important to realize that this is not the only factor, but a great cause or contributor for the rise in atheism has been the progress in science. And progress in science in general is a good thing, which we accept, but the way that people have viewed it and the way that people have understood it, and this misunderstanding has led to the rise in atheism. Now, because, if you have to look at it, the major religion in the world was Christianity for a long time. And when science really started its progress from Isaac Newton going on, then science proved a lot of things that were in the Bible to be incorrect. Because there are many statements in the Bible that are factually incorrect. And scientists slowly but surely discovered all of these mistakes. And Christians began leaving. There was a mass exodus of Christians out of Christianity into atheism because, number one, the mistakes in the scripture, and number two, very, very, very importantly, the way Christians view the world. So generally, many Christians at that time viewed the world as, God created the world, and then the world will run on its own, and the world runs independently on its own, and whenever God wanted, he can punish someone, or he can do something, or he can, so to say, interfere in the world, but by and large, the world can run itself. Now that was that's very different from how we as Muslims understand it, and we're going to touch on that just now. But this is how a Christian understood it at that time. And so they believed that God was acting in the world whenever there was lightning, or whenever there was an earthquake, or whenever something amazing took place. Now, what happened was science slowly began to discover that, wait, you know what? Lightning takes place because of this. Earthquakes take place because of, a shift in the tectonic plates. So science began to uncover the reasons behind why certain things were happening. And then Christians were forced to say, well, if this is the reason why it's happening, that means God is not doing it. And so it seemed like there was no place left for God in the known world because science was explaining everything away. And the way Muslims look at the world is absolutely different from that, and we're going to touch on that differently. So because of this so-called conflation between Christianity and religion, people began to see that there was a conflict between religion and science. Whereas in reality, it was science and Christianity that were at loggerheads. But people began to be under this misconception that there is a conflict, there is an incompatibility between religion and science as a whole. So here we have three common misconceptions which we're going to deal with. The first is, as we said, that science and religion are at loggerheads with one another. So we're going to discuss that. The second misconception that many people have is the only way we can get to know something is using the scientific method and using science. And the third misconception, it's a bit of an extreme one, is that science is always right. So people have this misconception that whatever scientists say will always be right. So let's deal with these misconceptions one by one and see what's the Islamic understanding of these viewpoints. So misconception number one, science and religion are at loggerheads. So first we need to understand what exactly is science and the scientific method. So science basically gives us information based on things that scientists can see sometimes using a telescope, using a microscope, using the eyes, they can see certain things. So they'll tell us that the planets are round. They'll tell us that, Earth is going around the sun because they can see it when they go to space. They'll tell us that our body is made up of, so many cells and this is what's in the cell because they can see it with a microscope. Science will also tell us that, every time you join this chemical and this chemical, then this reaction will come about. So science tests things in the world. For example, they'll take 100 people who are sick, have a certain sickness, give them a certain medication and say, okay, this medication is working for these people. Therefore, whenever someone is sick with this, we will give them this medication and inshallah it will work. That's what we'll say. So science tells us about how the world around us functions. Now, in Islam, and this is a very, very crucial point, we believe that everything that's happening, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating it using the worldly means that we see around us. So for example, if I take this remote and I drop it, then the law of gravity, the force of gravity, because of the force of the earth, it's falling. That's how we understand it scientifically. But Islamically, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's making it fall. Take another example. I have a bow and arrow. I draw back the arrow, I shoot it. In our understanding, the arrow is moving because the string is pushing it, and then the arrow is going to hit the animal, and the animal is injured because of the arrow. In the Islamic understanding, what's happening is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the arrow move. When the arrow hits the animal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating injury in the animal at the time that the arrow hits it. So all of these things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in specific ways, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it such that whenever there is paper, and I bring fire next to that paper, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create burning in the paper. So it's not that the fire independently of itself is burning the paper. It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create burning in the paper whenever fire goes next to the paper. And why this is so important is because if we understand that that's what's happening, then we understand that it's not necessary that the fire burns the paper. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, when I put the fire near the paper, He doesn't have to create burning. He can say, I'm going to allow it not to burn. Therefore, when Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into the fire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply did not create burning. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. That we told the fire become cool and a place of safety for Ibrahim alayhi salam. So when we understand the world like this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is causing everything that's happening into the world. Yes, there are physical causes and these things can tell us what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to do, but the ultimate doer at the end of the day, the person who's doing everything is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how does that tie up into what we're discussing now? It ties up because science is telling us and is informing us that if you join these two particles, you will form this element, and it's teaching us things like that. It's teaching us about how the world around us works. And we understand that everything that occurs in the world around us is from the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is part of the af'al, the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Science is thus teaching us about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in the world, right? Religion is based on Sharia. Islam is based on Sharia, the Quran and Hadith. The Quran and Hadith derive from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the words, the Quran is the direct words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if science is the actions and the af'al of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Sharia, the Quran, is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can never ever contradict the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just take a moment to understand what I'm saying here. I'm saying that the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens in the natural world, can never ever contradict with the aqwal and the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now you might say, okay, But what about all of these scientific theories that are coming up now, the theory of evolution, that seems to be contradicting so many things. So we need to make it clear, and this is the most important point perhaps of this section, is that science gives you results of varying degrees of certainty. So sometimes they see something with the naked eye. So we're sure about that. They saw the planet and it's round, whatever they saw it. Other times, they'll test something in a lab, 100,000 times, and they'll say, okay, every time you do this, this will happen. That too, we're quite sure about. But sometimes they'll just have theories. They'll have something like string theory, dark matter. All of these are just basically theories. So those things that science puts out, those things can definitely seem to contradict religion because those are merely theories. And the evolution itself also falls under that. It hasn't been specifically observed. What scientists have done is they have looked at change in the animals around us, and they have extrapolated into the past and assumed that the same things happened with human beings. So that's not certain, definitive knowledge, unlike Quran and Hadith, which we have, which is certain and definitive. So if we understand that when science is done correctly, when people are observing things, when they're testing things, then this will never contradict Quran and Hadith. But other theories that might come about and might change, then these things here, of course, outwardly, these theories will be proven wrong by scientists later. So these things we're not too concerned about at the moment. Right, so on to misconception number 2. Misconception number 2 is that the only way we can get to know something is via the scientific method. So if I want to know something, the only way I can know it is if I see it, if I test it, if scientists have tested it and they have told me about it. And many, many people actually believe this. Now the ulama of Islam from over 1,000 years ago have already discussed a very, very fundamental field when it comes to understanding the world, and that is how do we get to know things? In other words, what are the ways in which we can gain knowledge? And one word for this is epistemology. Epistemology basically means what can we do to gain knowledge about this world or about the next world. So the ulama of Ahlul Sunnah have basically all agreed that there are 3 basic ways in which we can attain knowledge. The first is through our 5 senses. So whenever I see something, I smell something, I taste something, then I have knowledge of that thing. And this is where the scientific method derives from. The second is using logic, using reasoning. So I can, using my mind, I know that if I take 10 objects and put another 10 objects next to it, there will be 20. I can work that out in my mind. I don't have to see it. I don't have to test it. Just using my mind, using my understanding, I can work that out. I understand that if something fell in the next room, there must be a reason why it fell. Everything that occurred, there has to be a reason for why it occurred. How do I know that? I didn't see someone pushing it over in the next room, but I understand the concept in my mind using logic that every single thing that occurs needs a reason for its occurrence. So logical reasoning is the second way which we can get to know things. The third way, and this is very, very important for Muslims, is via testimony. That imagine someone comes and tells you that, there's a tree that fell over on the road, somewhere near your house. And so one person comes and tells you that. So you'll probably believe him. Then a second person comes and tells you. Then a third person comes and tells you. 10, 20, 30 people come and tell you that a tree fell over on a certain road. You will definitely believe that that tree fell over on a certain road. You have knowledge that the tree fell over there. How do you have knowledge? Did you see the tree falling? No. Did you use your mind to work out that the tree fell? No. But so many people told you about it that you have knowledge of it. So therefore, tawatur, which we speak about when it comes to the transmission of the Quran, which was transmitted to us via mass transmission, we have 100% certainty that this is traced back to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So important to understand this, the 3 basic ways in which we can gain knowledge. Number 1 is using our 5 senses. This is where the scientific method derives from. Number 2 is using logic. And number 3 is via testimony, tawatur, mass transmission. All of these 3 are valid means for gaining complete certainty. Now, when you get into a topic with an atheist and you want to talk to him about God, and maybe you want to speak to him about the miracles of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You want to tell him that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did so many miracles. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he split the moon, he did this, he did that. They'll say, no, where's the proof? I didn't see it. I can't test it. How do I know that really happened? And he'll say, no, I only accept scientific evidence. But now we need to be reasonable here. This person in his daily life, does he only accept scientific evidence or does he accept testimony? How do we get to know about history if not for testimony? We can't test and see what happened in the past. We know what happened because people wrote records, we read those records, these things were passed down to us. Even about like how other countries look, we don't know except via testimony. Yes, someone can show us a picture, hey, you know what, this is what Malaysia looks like. But they'll have to tell us that that's Malaysia. So we have to rely on people telling us things to get knowledge. And an easy way to show this person that you know what, you also rely on testimony is to ask him, how do you know that your parents are your parents? And just think about that. How do we know that? We know that because they told us that, and everyone told us that. No one really went and did a DNA test and did a scientific test to find out. Why? Because everyone understands that eyewitness testimony, when someone tells you something, it's a form of gaining knowledge. So very important to remember this, that atheists in their everyday life, someone will tell them, you know what, there's an accident on this road, so don't take this road, go via another road. People will tell them that, they'll believe them, they won't go down that road, they'll go down the other road. So that means in their everyday life, they accept when people tell them something that is a form of information. But now when you want to talk to them about God, about religion, then they don't want to accept it. Then they say, no, we only accept scientific evidence. So this is inconsistency, this is not academic integrity, that across the board you want to accept testimony, but now when it comes to this topic you don't want to accept it. So important to understand this, that people telling you something, eyewitness testimony, is an acceptable means of gaining knowledge. Now those people who only rely on the scientific method and who feel like, whatever the scientific method says has to be correct, there are many problems with this. The first we just said is, what about eyewitness testimony? That's how you know that your parents are your parents, right? Number one. Number two, they are making a claim. They are saying that the only way we can get to know something is via science. So the first question we'll ask them is, can you prove to me that the scientific method leads to truth? How do you prove that to me? So how are they going to prove it to you? They're going to have to use logic, they're going to have to use reasoning, they're going to have to use all other methods. So if we ask them, use science to prove that science leads to the truth, they won't be able to do that. Because to prove that science leads to the truth, you need to revert to logic, you need to revert to other forms of reasoning besides the scientific method. So understand that yes, we do accept the scientific method, but it's not the only way of getting to truth. The scientific method, point number two, is inductive reasoning. So what's inductive reasoning? Just say, for example, in a hypothetical world, I want to know what color are swans. So I go around and I count, okay, this one is white, this one is white, this one is white. I count 99 swans and they all are white. And then I make a claim that all swans are white. But tomorrow in the morning when I wake up, I find another one and it's black. So why? Because I didn't examine every single swan in the world for me to make that conclusion. So similarly here, if we have to apply that to the scientific method, for example, you have 100 people that have a sickness. So researchers will test the medication out on these 100 people. Alhamdulillah, it worked on these 100 people. And then they will extrapolate that and they will say, this medicine cures this sickness for all people. But in reality, have they observed it on all people? No, they've only observed it on a select number of people. So this is inductive reasoning, where you tested it on a few people, on a few individuals, in a few certain instances, and it works, and now you want to extrapolate it and make a major statement that this works all around. This is how the scientific method works. Whenever they test something, they've only tested it in a limited sample size. They haven't tested every single person. So understand that the scientific method is inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is not 100% certain. So that's an important thing to remember. And a lot of the times, if you have to tell an atheist, for example, that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam went on the Mi'raj and he took the Buraq and he went to the seven heavens, they'll say, but that's impossible. It's not possible to travel so fast. How can these things happen? And obviously we know that the answer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do anything. All of this is within the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But why are they making this objection? We need to understand why they're not understanding this. Because they think that the laws of nature, like gravity, like the laws of friction, like the laws of thermodynamics, all of these laws which we see happening every day, they think that these laws can never be broken. So they feel, for example, if I drop something, it has to fall 100%. If I burn something, it has to burn 100%. Whereas what do we say? We say, yes, 99% of the time when you burn something, it will burn. When you drop something, it will fall. But these things are not definitive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is controlling it, and He can break it at any moment. And just think about the logic behind the reasoning. So humans have been on this earth, according to them, for let's say 200,000 years, according to the atheists, right? And for 200,000 years, every time they dropped something, it fell. Does that necessarily mean that it has to be like that in the future, or it has to be like that in the past? It doesn't necessarily mean that. The fact that you saw something for a limited amount of time doesn't mean it will always be like that. So even though we accept that, this reasoning is fine, when you drop something, it will fall, but understand the level of certainty it's giving you. It's only giving you about 95%, 99%. It's not 100%, not like when Quran tells you something, not like when authentic hadith tells you something. So understand the level of certainty that different types of information is giving you. And the third misconception that we're going to deal with is, it's a very extreme misconception, is that whatever scientists say is always right. And this is something that, alhamdulillah, many people realize that this is not correct, this is not 100% true. And we've already discussed that scientists give you theories of varying strength. So if they see something, it's quite strong. If they tested it, it's quite strong. If they just have a theory about maybe this works like that, it's not that strong. And scientists themselves, as we look at one very, very interesting example, have got things wrong in the past on many, many occasions. Scientists themselves cannot agree on such. So, if you look at it, previously they would tell you the yolk of the egg is not healthy. Then they said, no, it's healthy. So things like this, they'll give you medical information, they'll give you health information. It changes over time, even when it comes to dieting, the Banting diet, whether you should avoid carbohydrates, whether you should avoid fats, because of the information as it's changing, the scientific theories around this are changing as well. So if we understand that it's impossible for it to be such that whenever a scientist makes a claim, it's true. That just can't be the case. Because number one, they've been proven wrong in the past. Number two, they contradict each other on many things and the scientists themselves know that it's just a theory. Sometimes it's the people on the ground who misinterpret the information and feel like, this is definitive information. Now, a very, very interesting example is the example of Isaac Newton and his theory of gravity. So it's famously spoken about the apple that fell on Isaac Newton's head, and he thought about the theory of gravity and he came up with it, although that story is not correct. But the reality of the matter is Isaac Newton came up with a theory of gravity, of how gravity works, that if you're on a larger planet, the gravity will be more, and if you go to a smaller planet, the gravity will be less. And his theory worked. The calculations he gave, they worked. Whenever we tested them on Earth, they worked. Whenever we tested them with regard to the movements of other planets, this theory held up perfectly. In fact, we even used Isaac Newton's theory of gravity in the calculations to go to the moon. They used his calculations there as well. But people realized after a while, when they looked at the movement of Mercury, that it wasn't going according to Isaac Newton's theory of gravity. And they realized that he got something wrong. And they had to move to Einstein's theory and understanding of gravity. Of course, I'm just saying this in a very basic fashion. There's people here who know much more about this than me. But they had to slightly alter the theory. Why? Because this was inductive reasoning. They worked with whatever they had on Earth. They worked with whatever they could see. But as soon as they added a new sample to the population, then they realized that, wait, we didn't get it exactly right. It has to be changed. It has to be altered. So understand that sometimes even a theory that's testable, that's used, that's producing results, can be slightly off the mark, can need to be adjusted slightly, because it is inductive reasoning at the end of the day. So just remember that term, understand that, and it'll help you to put into perspective what sort of certainty you are expected to get from scientific reasoning. Now, a common misconception that we have amongst many Muslims is that Muslims are against science as a whole. This is a it's a feeling, it's a sentiment that you'll experience with many Muslims, that science is bad, science only tells you bad things, they're wrong, they don't know what they're saying. And you get two extremes, basically. We've got people on the one hand who are trusting everything that science is saying, and you've got people on the other hand who don't want to accept anything that science is saying and are saying science is bad as a whole. But we need to differentiate between two terms. One is science, and one is scientism. So science is, people trying to get results using the scientific method, inshallah, they're being objective and all of these things. And scientism it refers to those people who simply accept whatever science says, who say that the scientific method is the only way to get knowledge, and who basically ridicule any other means of getting knowledge. They are extreme scientists, meaning they go very, very, deep into this understanding of the scientific method and its ability to give you information. So we as Muslims, we are against scientism, because scientism is completely wrong. We have other ways of getting knowledge. We have testimony, we have logic. It doesn't make any sense. We're completely against this. But science as a whole, no, we're not against science. Progress, scientific progress, as we know, Muslims were at the forefront of that for many, many centuries. So it's important that when we're explaining these concepts, we differentiate between extreme on the one side, scientism, and science on the other hand, which we don't necessarily have a problem with. So two important concepts. And we need to ensure that our everyday Muslim understands these concepts and the difference between science and scientism. Now this whole section that we just discussed, how do I get to know things, using testimony, using my five senses, all of this here is what I like to call the argument before the argument. Because if you're going to go to an atheist and give him your proof, and you got a logical proof, everything that begins to exist needs a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Therefore, there's God. You're going to come to him with that. He's going to tell you, I don't accept that as evidence. I want proper evidence. I want the scientific method. I want to see something. I want to test it. Then only I'll accept it. So you can have all the evidences in the world, but if he doesn't accept that line of evidence, then it's pointless. It comes to nothing. Therefore, before you even go into the evidence, you need to have this discussion about what counts as evidence, why there are other forms of evidence that work as well. Once you've brought the person onto the same page, he understands that logical reasoning is necessary. He understands that when someone tells you something, it can give you truth as well. Once you're on the same page when it comes to that, then you can now go to your arguments. Then you can now pull out your arguments and say, okay, this is a reason why you should believe in God. This is the reason why you should believe in Islam. But it's imperative that you have this discussion first before you move on to that. And I think also if we just take time to step back and look at the clash of worldviews that we have here, that Islam has a specific way that it views the world. Islam views the world as a creator, that it has a creator. It has purpose, it has meaning, it has design. Everything that we see in the world around us is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The things we see in the world around us, if you look at Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he would treat, even the mountain of Uhud, he addressed the mountain of Uhud. If you look at the bark of tree that was used as his mimbar, after the mimbar was changed, he hugged it and it cried. If you look at how Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam interacted with nature, interacted with the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala around it, it was that these things had meaning, that they were the creation, how Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam interacted with rain. Whereas if you look at the atheistic worldview, it's that all of this is just a bunch of atoms that came together by mistake, and there's no reason for any of this. So there's no respect shown to the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no respect shown to a human being. Why? Because for them, it was just an accident. All of this just happened by accident. This just happened by accident for them. So there's no design behind it. There's no purpose behind it. And that's why you'll see many of them begin to lose hope, begin to fall into depression, because you have this view of the world that I was just an accident, everything was just an accident, and you don't understand the great purpose, the great design behind everything. So this is a clash of worldviews, and we view a world that is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we are allowed to make use of, and we really can appreciate all of these things. It leads us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this worldview. But very often, if someone delves into science, as is necessary, when you're working with the natural world, you begin to lose this understanding. You begin to start viewing the world also as just atoms that are there. So it's important that we realign ourselves, we recalibrate ourselves, and we remind ourselves that Islam has a specific worldview, and the way that modern atheists view the world is completely alien to the way that Islam views the world. Now we're going on to an interesting topic, which is the burden of proof. So we're getting into the discussion now between you and an atheist. So you approach an atheist, you're having a discussion with him, and he tells you to provide proof for your belief. Now, does he have to provide the proof, or do you have to provide the proof? That's what we're going to be discussing here in the section on the burden of proof. So remember, we differentiated between an atheist and an agnostic. An atheist is someone who is claiming that there is no God, right? But we said that very few people are actually atheists in that sense of the word. Most people are agnostics. They say, we don't believe because there's no evidence. So they're not saying that there is no God. They're just saying we don't believe because you haven't shown us evidence. So these are generally the people you are going to be discussing with. So when you get into a discussion with such people, it's important to know that even in Islam we have a qaida, al-bayyinatu ala al-mudda'i, that the burden of proof is upon the person who's making a claim. And in this case here, rightfully so, I am making the claim that God exists. He is saying I don't know. So according to the normal qaida, according to the normal rule, I will have to provide the proof. Right? So it's not fair for me to tell him, no, you must show me proof why you don't believe. Because that would be inconsistent, that won't be fair, that won't be right. But there are certain things that we can do to shift the burden of proof onto the agnostic, but it must be done in the correct way. And that's what we're going to look at now. How can we shift the burden of proof onto the agnostic person? So the first option we have is we tell him that, see, yes, anyone who's making a claim needs to provide proof for his claim unless what he is claiming is a self-evident truth. So we tell him that, see, there are certain truths about life that are self-evident, that are so obvious that no one needs to prove them. So let me give you an example. Our existence, the fact that we're living right now, it is technically possible that all of us are we lying in a laboratory and our brains are connected to some computer and the computer is feeding us this information and we're not really here right now. Someone could say that's a possibility, right? And he'll say, you must bring proof that we are existing right now. We'll tell him, don't be silly, man. How can you even say that? Obviously, we're existing right now. So there are certain truths that we don't have to prove. They are taken for granted. They are self-evident truths. Another example is the fact that the past is real, that yesterday really happened. How do I prove? Do I have to prove that yesterday really happened? If someone came and stole something from me or hit me yesterday and I take him to a court of law, and in the court of law he says, well, you are claiming that yesterday really happened, so you must prove that yesterday really happened, and then only you can, I'll pay you back your money. Now we'll tell him, I don't have to prove that. Everyone accepts it. It's a self-evident truth that yesterday, that the past is real. It's a self-evident truth that I exist, that we all exist. So similarly, here what we can say is, if someone wants to argue against a self-evident truth, the burden of proof is on him. If someone wants to prove that the past is not real, he must go about proving that. So it's a possible step that we can take here where we say that, you know what, the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fact that the universe comes from a creator is something that's so self-evident, that's so obvious that anyone who wants to go against it, he must bring the proof to go against it. So that's one method that many people have taken, and this is the route that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah also has taken. And the only difficulty you're going to have with this is, how are you going to define what's a self-evident truth, what's not a self-evident truth? You're going to have to provide definitions for that. Maybe you can say things that everyone accepts regardless of their background, regardless of where they came from. If everyone accepts it, then it's... But you're going to face some difficulty in proving exactly what's a self-evident truth and what's not a self-evident truth. So a reminder, although it's a powerful argument and it serves as a reminder that not everything needs to be proven. But whether the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala falls under this or not, it's a matter of debate. So it might not be a conclusive proof. The second option, and this is to shift the burden of proof, and this is one that I really prefer, it's called the only possibility. So we agree with the person that yes, I am saying that there is a God. I believe 100% there is a God. You saying no, you don't know. So I need to provide the proof if and only if you can provide another option for me. So if I say, for example, that, you know what, yesterday someone drank my tea while I wasn't at the office, and I think that it's Zubair. Zubair drank my tea. And they'll say, well, where's your proof? I'll say, there's no other option, no one else. If you can provide me with another option besides him, then okay, I'll have to provide proof. But if this was the only option, then I don't need to provide proof. So let's take a classic example that atheists love to use. So they say, imagine one of the mashayikh here took a coin, he went in the other room and he tossed the coin. And we all sitting here, we don't know whether the coin landed on heads or tails, right? And one person says, there's me, and another person, I say that it's tails. The other person says, I don't know because I can't see what the coin landed on, so I'm not sure. So the atheist says, see, the person who's claiming it's tails, he must provide proof that it's tails. The person who's saying, I don't know, he doesn't have to provide proof. And we agree with that. But let's change the example slightly. Let's say we had a coin that was tails on both sides. And now someone went in the other room, he tossed this coin, and it landed. It has tails on both sides. Now I say it's tails, because that's the only option. And the other person says, no, I don't know what it is, you must prove to me. I don't have to prove to him, because that is the only option. So this is a path that we can take with the atheist, that we tell him, see, I am saying that the cause for the universe is a creator who created everything. This is my explanation for why the universe is here. And I will provide you proof if you can provide me with an alternative explanation. Then the burden of proof is on me. Otherwise, why must I prove it to you if there's no other explanation that you can think of? So he might say, okay, well, what if the universe just came into being on its own magically? He might say that. So we'll show him, why this is impossible, why this can't be, and we'll knock that position out. So again, there's only one position left. Then he might say, well, what if the universe always existed and it didn't have a creator? And then we'll explain to him why it's impossible for there to be an infinite regress. And we're going to discuss that a bit later on. So we'll knock that out of the park as well. And so it's only one option. And if there's only one option, I don't have to provide proof for it because there's no viable alternative besides that one option. So I hope we understood this, that generally, yes, the burden of proof is on us because we are making a claim. We are saying that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. He is the cause for the universe. But there are other ways in which we can make the other person take the burden of proof. If, for example, we say that the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a self-evident truth, or if we ask him that, provide another possibility and then I will give you proof. So before we even step into the argument and we provide proofs, we need to clearly understand who needs to provide proof in this situation. So here we've understood that, yes, we will be the ones providing proof once you show us a viable alternative. So the third option now is where we actually go about providing the evidence. And now we are going to get into the section where we're going to look for the evidence. We're going to look at the evidences for the existence of a creator. Then we're going to look at the evidences for Islam being true. And after that, we're going to look at morality. But inshallah, we'll take a small break.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So just a quick recap of what we've covered so far. We've understood that as Muslims, we have three different sources of information: our five senses, our logic, and testimony that comes to us, Quran, Hadith, etc. All of these are necessary and are definite sources of information. On top of this, also, we've understood that the burden of proof is upon us if the other person can provide another alternative. And now we are going to look at some proofs that can be put forward for the existence of God. Now, I'm just going to make it clear here that there's not enough time to go into each proof in detail. So each proof in detail needs about an hour on its own without exaggeration. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to explain to you the basics of each proof. In the module notes that were sent out, there's more detail there. You can read the module notes. They give you much more detail to be able to use the argument effectively. And in the module notes, there's further reading that you need to do to really understand the argument properly. Now, before we get into the arguments, there's a quick but very important clarification. And this is, what level of certainty does one need to achieve before he believes something and acts accordingly? So generally in your everyday life, as we spoke about earlier, you read the weather report and it says, tomorrow it's going to be raining, 70% chance of rain, and you are having a function. So you say, well, let's see if we can have an indoor function. Let's move. So we believe what the person says, even though we're not 100% sure. We can say, okay, but it's possible that it doesn't rain. Okay, what if, this happens, or what if that happens? We know there's so many other possibilities. Yet the fact that, we have a certain amount of certainty allows us to believe in it and allows us to act upon it. So someone said, well, there's traffic on this route, so don't take that route. So only one person told us. He could have made a mistake. He could have told us the wrong road. He could have seen wrong. Maybe it wasn't an accident that was going to last very long. But still, we take into account what he says and we act on that information. And everyone does that. I do that. You do that. The atheist himself also does that. He believes things even if it is not 100% true. So here, the problem, we gave the example of how does he know that his parents are his parents? He knows it because of testimony. It could be that, they've left him and he is actually adopted. It's a possibility. But he doesn't take into account every single possibility. If it's more than likely to be true, we will believe it, he will believe it, and we'll act upon it. Now, the thing is, why the difference here?
Why is it that when we bring these arguments to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, to show that Islam is true, then the atheist will say, well, you know what, it's possible, what about this? Oh, but you haven't explained this. What about this one very unlikely possibility? And maybe we can't give an answer to that one unlikely possibility. But the question is, do we even need to? Why is it such that in our everyday life, we're ready to accept this amount of certainty, but for this, we'll say, no, until you can prove to me 100%, then I'm not going to believe it. So we also, before we get into the argument, we need to make that clear that it's very disingenuous to now, in your everyday life, you accept a certain amount of proof, and now when we're having this discussion, because maybe you don't want to accept it or you're scared, you say, no, you're only going to accept 100%. That's not fair. There's no intellectual integrity in doing something like this. So that's the first point I just wanted to make before we get into the different arguments, that it's not necessary that we have to answer every single possibility. That's something. Yes, we can, with enough knowledge, inshallah, we are able to do that, but that's not a necessary condition. Now, the arguments for the existence of God, this is something people have gone into for thousands of years, no exaggeration. And there's so many different arguments. But because our point here is not to be able to understand the nitty-gritties of every argument, I'm just going to give you a brief explanation of perhaps the three most common arguments that have featured throughout history. Again, for further detail, read the module notes. For further reading, the module notes have which things you need to read further. We just need to get a basic understanding of these arguments. So the first is the argument from Fitra. And as pointed out in the comments, I'm not sure exactly who it was online, he mentioned that this is very, very similar to the argument of self-evident truths. So the argument of Fitra, it rests on the hadith when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra," that every single newborn child is born with an innate disposition to be able to recognize the truth. And then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ وَيُنَصِّرَانِهِ, that his parents then go about, taking him to the wrong religion, making him a Jew, making him a Christian. But when he is born, he has this innate disposition to recognize the truth. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا, that there is a certain way we've been created, that we can just recognize certain things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us like that. So this argument was popularized in a very different fashion by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Yes, many scholars in the past spoke about the fitrah and recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if you want to read further about this, then read the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah, who really made this into an argument in and of itself to justify our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah speaks about the fact that we are all imbibed with this ability to recognize Allah. And as pointed out also in the comments by the same person, he mentioned that studies have been done to show that a child, if he is left without being interfered with, will innately be able to recognize that there's a creator of the world. Studies have been done like this. So it's important to access these studies and be able to use them. If we look also at history, look at the empires throughout history. Yes, they may not have had the exact same conception of God, but they all, almost all believed in a higher power. They believed that there was a creator of the world. So what is this all telling us? That, we have this thing in us that it turns towards the creator. It leans towards the fact that this entire universe could not have come about on its own. And what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is saying here is, he's not saying that there's no proof. He's saying, for example, if I go out into nature, you take someone who perhaps he doesn't believe in God, you take him out into nature, you go out camping in the night, you go to the forest, you lie down, you look at the stars in the night sky, and you're just amazed by how many they are, how insignificant you are, how amazing this entire universe is. And that just strikes you, and you don't have to say, okay, you don't have to necessarily come with an argument. Okay, the universe is amazing. Everything that's amazing needs a creator. Therefore, Allah created this. You don't even need to do that. Just by witnessing this, your inner fitrah, your inner understanding understands automatically without the need for an argument that, there is a creator. You don't even need to reason your way through it. And the way they liken it is like when I see something in front of me, I can see the students in front of me. I know that they are there. I don't need to have a logical argument. Okay, the students are in front of me. They're appearing in front of me. Therefore, they're probably there. There's no need for an argument. When I see people here, I know that they are there. And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is saying that when we witness the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, automatically we are filled with this awe and we get this knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Now, you're probably rightfully thinking that this is not going to necessarily be the most convincing argument against a hardcore atheist who wants evidence. He's going to say, well, you know what, that's human beings believe all sorts of things that are not true, so I don't have to accept it. But there are many, many ways, and if you read the further reading and you look more on the internet, where people show that the natural intuition of human beings many times, far more often than not, turns out to be correct. So that's one. Look at the studies of children that innately believe in a God. Look at, all of the empires throughout history, or most of them also believed in this. But again, it's more effective when you're talking to someone who he's listening to you, he's willing to understand what you have to say, he's willing and he has this need for spirituality in his life, he has this need to try and connect with God. Then you explain to him that this fitrah that we all have within us, that's not going to be satisfied until you recognize your reason for living, until you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you. So again, this is an argument. It has specific places and purposes where it should be used, but it's a very, very powerful argument to people, to generally the lay person who just, he can sense that everything, if we start off from the premise, because we know that definitely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world. So we know that every person we talk to has a fitrah. And we know that every single person in the world, whether he's an atheist now or not, but he has this ability to recognize God inbuilt within him. So all we have to do now is uncover that, is unblock the fitrah. Ibn Taymiyyah speaks about how the fitrah sometimes gets clouded, gets blocked, so a person can't see the truth. So this argument has its place, and inshallah in the further reading in the module notes, you'll be able to go deeper into this. The second argument, and this is probably the most popular argument that has been about, let's say for the last few hundred years, is the argument from design. So the argument from design, and it's also an argument that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings forth in the Quran, that إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the day and the night, in the amazing signs that you're seeing around you, there are ayat لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. For those people who will think and who will reason, there are ayat in all of these things to show them that there is a creator. And there are many ways we can reason from the world around us to the creator. One of the ways is this argument from design, where we look at the world around us, we see the beauty, and we see the complexity also in the world around us. So take the eye, for example. It has about 2 million different parts in your eye. This eye that we have here. According to some scientists, they estimated it's around 576 megapixels. That's the eye that we have. The amount of moving parts that it has, the way that it changes its shape based on the light, based on how far we're looking, it changes, based on if we're looking something close, it changes. All of this automatically, without any of us having to even do anything. It releases tears to make sure the eyes remain lubricated, to take away dust from the eye. All of these things are so complex, it lasts for 50, 60 years. Which piece of technology can ever claim that? So the way that this argument works is that if your phone camera, which is nowhere near your eye, if we can look at that and we can understand that there was a designer there for the phone, then all the more we can understand, naturally, it just makes so much of sense that there's a designer for this eye. There has to be someone behind this, someone who designed it, some being who was, all knowledgeable, all powerful, who created this eye, who created us as human beings. And we can take anything, for example. I just took the eye as one example. You can go into any portion of nature. Take the leaf, the way the process of photosynthesis happens, it converts the light into food for itself. You can take the human body, the human cell, the DNA in the human cell. How much of information is stored in every cell of the human body is mind-boggling. You can take any one of these things and you can show that, look at the complexity of this, look at the beauty of this here. There definitely has to be a designer. And this in a way is also linked to the argument from fitrah. It's just that we're trying to put out an actual argument here. So that's one way of looking at the argument from design. The other way that scientists use is called the argument from fine-tuning. So here, scientists look at the force of gravity that we have around us, the gravitational constant, all of these forces that are working to keep the world, obviously bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, to keep the world working around us, the gravitational constant, the weak atomic force, the strong nuclear force, all of these forces here, they have a very specific number to them. They have a very specific amount to them. And if these constants, if these were changed by even 0.00, I don't have the exact number here, 0.000001%, the world around us as we know wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have life on earth today if these things were changed by even a little bit. So the fine-tuning, the precise nature of the constants in the universe is so, it's so precise that it could not have been by chance. And just to give an example of this, I don't know if any of you have played the board game Scrabble. It's a famous example. So you take it has all of these blocks with each one has a letter on it. And so imagine we took all those blocks and it has random letters of the alphabet, many of different letters. We take it, we put it into a bucket. We take that bucket with all these letters and we throw it up in the air. And all of these letters fly into the air and they fall on the floor. And when we look, they've fallen and they've written a poem. And they fall in a beautiful poem it's composed. That's, what are the chances of something like that happening? So the chances of a life-permitting universe with people like us that are intelligent, that are here, the chances of that forming is even less than the chances of those letters falling into a beautiful poem. So understand the powerful force of this nature, the fine-tuning argument, that it's so unlikely when you look at it statistically that a universe like this formed. Even in this example of the words of the Scrabble just gives you an understanding of how unlikely it is. So these are very, very powerful arguments as well. And again, in the module notes, you'll find all the numbers that you need to quote. You'll find the relevant facts and statistics that you can quote to use when you are talking to an atheist. So when you talk about the argument from design, one is we look at the complexity of something like the eye or the leaf or the human body or whatever it is, and we say that if that was complex and if the phone is complex and it needs a creator, so too everything around us. And also we can look at the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the conditions are just right for human beings. If the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere was just slightly more, slightly less, we wouldn't really be able to survive here. So we look at how perfectly everything around us is, and if just one thing was changed, how the universe around us wouldn't be as it is today, and we understand how unlikely it is for that to happen, that there has to be someone behind it who designed it like this. So that's the two different ways. There are many, many different ways also. Argument from design, and the relevant statistics and facts are there in the notes, inshallah. And we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reasons with us like this. He says, وَفِي الْأَرْضِ آيَاتٌ لِلْمُوقِنِينَ. That in the earth, all around you, there's signs for those people who have certainty. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ. And even in yourself, in your own human body, there's so many signs. أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Are you not going to see? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reasons with us like this in the Quran, reasons with those people who do not believe in the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last argument that we're going to have just specifically for the belief in God is the argument from temporality. I know it's a big word, temporality. Temporality just means the fact that something never used to exist and then it began to exist. So all of us here, we are temporal. Every single thing in this room is temporal. Why? It never used to exist 1,000 years ago and now it exists. So this is also called the cosmological argument. There's different names for it. And it basically goes like this. Again, we need about half an hour to go into all of the details, but just to understand what the argument is saying. So this uses logical premises that are found, in subjects like mantiq, etc., where you reason down to a conclusion. So for example, you say, all cats like milk. I know that's not true, but I'm just saying, imagine you make a statement, all cats like milk. And this is a cat in front of me, for example. Therefore, this cat likes milk. So you use two statements and you get, or even more, and you get to a conclusion. If those two statements are true, the conclusion necessarily follows. So if we say all human beings were born from a parent at least, to include Isa alayhi salam, right? And then we say, I am a human being. Therefore, what's the conclusion? I was born from a parent. So this same sort of Aristotelian logic that we're using from Mantiq, we use the same thing here. So the first premise that we have is everything that begins to exist has a cause. If something began to exist, it must have a cause. There's no two ways about it. And you'll find not many people will dispute with this. People understand if something fell, there must be a cause. If something wasn't here 100 years ago and it's here today, there must be a cause for it. And we live our everyday lives. If someone hit me, I'll turn around, hey, who hit me? Because I know that everything that happens, there must be a cause for it. So this premise is pretty much undisputed and no one really disputes it. The second premise is that the universe began to exist. So the first premise, anything that begins to exist has a cause. The second premise is the universe began to exist. Now here, scientists or atheists will try to say, well, the universe always existed. It never began to exist. So that's their way out with that. They try to get out. They say, no, the universe didn't begin to exist. The universe existed since eternity. It always existed. And to disprove them, there's many, many different ways we can disprove them. But I'm not going to go into that now because, again, time permitting. But I urge you to read the module notes. There's arguments set out there to show that it's impossible for the universe to have always existed from infinity, or we would have not got here today. So just to give you one example, that if the universe has been existing for an infinite amount of time, we would have not reached here today. What does that mean? For example, let's just say someone asks me for 10 rand. And I say, okay, I'm going to give you the 10 rand, but I don't have it. Let me borrow it from my friend. And I go to my friend and he says, no, I don't have the 10 rand. Let me borrow it from my friend. And if we assume that they have to ask an infinite amount of people, and infinity means it never comes to an end, before they come to me, will I ever get the 10 rand? I'll never get the 10 rand because it's going to keep on going. So similarly, this is just a basic form of the argument. If the universe has been existing since eternity, we would have never reached here today. There had to have been a starting point. So that's like a way we can use to show that, it has not been existing for infinity. Obviously, we know that in science as well, let's say about 100 years ago, they believed in the steady state theory, which was that the universe was constant and it was always existing. And now they've gone to the Big Bang theory, which is that the universe existed from a certain point. And so that also supports us, but we won't necessarily use that in our reasoning because, as we said, it's a scientific theory, it can change. But we'll use logical proofs to show that the universe has to have a beginning. So if we prove that the universe began to exist, then the conclusion is the universe has a cause. So if everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And that cause we say is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever caused the universe must be extremely knowledgeable, that being must be, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely knowledgeable, must be all powerful, must be wise, must have, the ability to make decisions. So from here we reason to prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran uses a form of reasoning like this where He says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. That these people around you, were they created from nothing? Did they just pop out of existence? Or were they the creators? Did they create themselves? أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Were they the ones who created the heavens and the earth? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing that there's no other viable alternative except that you have one all-powerful, all-knowing creator who created everything. So those were three basic arguments. Again, we didn't go in detail, but we just got an understanding of the argument from fitrah that every one of us is born and every one of us is created with the ability to understand God. Then we've basically realize that there is a God. Then we went through the argument from design, we looked at the eye, or we looked at the constants in the universe, and then we looked at the cosmological argument, which has a premise, and a conclusion. So that's where, if you want to do further reading, you need to focus your efforts on those three arguments. Inshallah, I think those will be the most persuasive, but there are other arguments as well. Now we look at proofs for the truth of Islam specifically. And these arguments, I find, in my personal opinion, sometimes are much more convincing in many ways. And we look at these arguments now. So we're going to look at arguments that are found in the Quran, that the Quran itself makes. We're going to look at arguments that are found in the Hadith, just two of them. And then we're going to look at just one other all-round general argument. So in the Quran, there are 4 miracles which the Quran itself speaks about. There's many miracles in the Quran. There's so many that we keep discovering, but there are 4 that the Quran itself speaks about. The first is the miracle of preservation. And we know the verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have revealed the Quran and we are going to preserve it. At the time of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a promise that this book is going to be preserved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. And if we look today, there is no text that has been preserved like the Quran. If you want to compare it to the Bible, there's no comparison. Western historians themselves admit that the manuscript tradition of the Quran is the most stable from any other ancient document. And if we look at, just the memorization, the oral tradition of the Quran, it's something unmatched, it's something unbelievable. Yet at the time of revelation, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam via the Quran informed the Sahaba that the Quran was going to be preserved like this. And today we can see the culmination of the prophecies that the Quran is preserved like this. So the first miracle we can look at is the miracle of preservation. The second miracle is the miracle of prediction. This is a very, very interesting one. That in the Quran, in Surah Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim غُلِبَتِ الروم في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون. That at the time when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was preaching in Makkah, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire was having, a huge war, an intercontinental war they were having between themselves. And the Romans were defeated by the Persians to the extent where it seemed like the Roman Empire was about to collapse. And when this happened, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed غُلِبَتِ الروم, that the Romans have now been conquered. But وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. After this defeat, they are going to come back and they are going to be victorious. Now someone might say, okay, it's not a very great prediction because eventually in the future anything can happen. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فِي بِضْعِ سِنِينَ, that they're going to come back and they're going to be victorious within 3 to 9 years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a time stamp for when the Roman Empire would rectify itself. And read the module notes again, you'll see quotes of Western historians who speak about at that time, the entire world, everyone who was following what was happening, believed that the Persian Empire was about to wipe out the Roman Empire. In fact, the Romans themselves at that time were very, very close to just submitting to the Persian Empire and saying, okay, well, you know what, you can take us over, we'll be a vassal state and we'll pay you. But the Quran at that time makes a prediction that the Romans will bounce back. The Romans will take back their land. Fi bid'i sinin. Bid'a is a word that means between 3 to 9. In less than 9 years, the Romans will take back their land. And history bears testament to the fact that within 9 years, the Romans took back Jerusalem. The Romans took back most of the land. In fact, they even went a bit into the lands of the Persians. And this was if you just have to put yourself into the context, what a bold prediction this was. At a time in the world when everyone else is thinking one thing, the Quran comes and says, no, in 3 to 9 years, there's going to be a complete reversal. Imagine, just think about how bold this prediction was. And history has proved that it was correct. Quranic miracle number 3, the miracle of inimitability. So what this means is that no one can ever imitate the Quran. In many, many different places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala issues out the challenge. We know this, very famous. قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِثْلِهِ قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges the disbelievers of Makkah. Let's think about who the disbelievers of Makkah were. There were people, historically it's proven, who were trying to wipe out Islam. There were people, it's historically proven, who were extremely eloquent in Arabic. So they had every reason to try and meet this challenge. The Quran challenged them openly. There was every motivating factor for them to go and meet this challenge. They had the so-called abilities. They were well versed in Arabic. They loved their poetry. Yet history bears testimony again here that none of them ever felt that they missed this challenge. In fact, the polytheists of Makkah chose to go to war with the Muslims. They chose all other tactics. But the Quran is telling them, bring one surah like a surah of the Quran and you will have fulfilled whatever you wanted. Yet they never did that. Why? Because it was impossible. So even though today we may not necessarily be able to understand the linguistic miracle of the Quran, although there are books written on this in English that are very helpful, it's not so easy to understand the linguistic miracle of the Quran. But what happened in history bears testament to the fact that it's impossible. Because if it was possible, those people who had every motivation to do it would have done it. So that's Quranic miracle number 3. Quranic miracle number 4, the miracle of infallibility. Again here in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do they not ponder over the Quran? If the Quran had to come from anyone besides Allah, you would have found multiple contradictions and multiple mistakes in the Quran. And we know, anyone who's written a book will know that you write it once first draft, you go through it again second draft, you send it to the editor, he proofreads it, he fact checks it, he makes sure there's no errors in it, and it goes for a second round of editing, and eventually when the book comes out, there's still 1 or 2 mistakes in it. Now imagine the Quran. It's being revealed over a period of 23 years. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is reciting it to the Sahaba are memorizing it, it's being written down, it's compiled in a book, no editing, no checking, no proofreading in the sense of the content. And yet for 1,400 years people have read through it. Enemies of Islam have gone through it trying to find errors. And I promise you, if you look at the errors, you'll see that they have been completely unable to find any error in the Quran. So this is a miracle, and the Quran speaks about that. وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ. If it was from someone besides Allah, you will definitely find errors in it. But it is from Allah, so you don't find errors in it. So this is Quranic miracle number 4. Let's go on now to 2 prophecies of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I find these to be the most compelling prophecies. There are many others. There's about 10 or 20 documented ones that are extremely compelling, but these two I find to be perhaps the most compelling. So this is in the hadith of Jibreel, where Jibreel alayhi salam came as a human being to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam asks him about the day of Qiyamah. Or Jibreel alayhi salam, asked Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam about the day of Qiyamah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, I do not know when is the day of Qiyamah. And Jibreel alayhi salam asks, okay, give me some signs of the day of Qiyamah. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam replies, أن ترى الحفاة العراة العالة رعاء الشاء يتطاولون في البنيان. That you will see barefooted, unclothed herdsmen competing in the construction of tall buildings. And all commentators of the hadith understand this was referring to the Bedouins in Arabia. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says that a sign of Qiyamah is that you will find the Bedouin Arabs competing with one another to build tall buildings. Now put yourself in the picture of when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam made this prophecy. The Bedouin Arabs themselves they were living in tents. They were moving around. They were nomadic, probably most of the time. Buildings at that time didn't go over 2 stories, maybe 3 stories, some forts that the Jews had. But the least likely of people to ever compete in tall buildings at that time would have been the Bedouin Arabs, no doubt about that. And even up until 200, 300 years ago, there was no sign of anything like this happening. But again, today, if we look in the world, look in Dubai, look in Saudi Arabia, the tallest of buildings are being built by who? Arabs whose ancestors were once Bedouin Arabs. And Arabs who we would have never ever thought that they would have competed with one another in building tall buildings. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is predicting this 1,400 years ago. So this is an extremely powerful prophecy of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we can use. And the thing about these proofs that prove Islam is that if you prove Islam, you already have proved that there is a creator, obviously. So sometimes using these arguments, they can be even more powerful in that you're achieving a lot in one shot. You are proving that Islam is true, and by default, of course, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Now, I've only brought 2 prophecies here. But the thing about, when you're talking to an atheist about prophecies, is he can make some excuses for one, he can make some excuses for 2. He can say, oh, well, this was just an accident. People say a lot of things. It's possible that over time, something like that. He can make a lot of excuses for one. But once you bring one, you bring a second one, you bring a third one, you bring a fourth one, then there's no way of explaining yourself out of it. So it's important. I've only got 2 here, but read in the module notes, there's more, or use all of the arguments together. That's why sometimes it's not one argument that we're relying on. It's a combination of different arguments to slowly make the person see that, okay, fine, you had an objection to this argument. Okay, fine, this you didn't accept this one. But what about all of them together? They can never ever be refuted. And look at this example. The second prophecy of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, also very amazing. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that the day of Qiyamah will not come حتى تعود أرض العرب مروجا وأنهارا, until the Arabian Peninsula, the land of the Arabs, returns to being rivers and meadows and forests and lush again. Now just think about the Arabian Peninsula, how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahaba used to struggle for water. Water was a very precious commodity. It was a desert, it was a barren desert, the Saudi Arabia. Yes, there were certain portions of the Arabian Peninsula that were lush, but in general, it was a desert place with the annual rainfall being quite low. At that time, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is saying what? He's not saying one thing, he's saying 2 things. He's saying in the future, the Arabian Peninsula will become lush again with forests, meadows and rivers. And also he's saying that in the past, because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, Hatta ta'uda, until it returns to being. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is also saying that in the past, before Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there was a time when the Arabian Peninsula was filled with rivers, meadows and forests. So 2 claims that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made in this hadith. It was a prophecy and it was a claim about the past. And in the module notes, I've linked the article from the Smithsonian where they speak about archaeologists who went to the Arabian Peninsula. They dug down, they found the sort of animals that were there, aquatic animals, and they've come to the conclusion that Arabia is a cyclical desert. What does that mean is Arabia will transform from being deserts, from being rivers, meadows, and forests, and then it will become a desert, and then it will become again, rivers will flow there again, it will become lush again, and then it will become a desert. It's a cyclical desert that carries on like that throughout history. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made this prophecy when 1,400 years ago, 200 years ago, if you told someone Arabia would become lush again, the entire Arabia, or it was lush in the past, they would have laughed at you. They would have said it's impossible. How can something like that happen? Yet the prophecy of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has been again proven true. So, this is a very, very, very powerful prophecy. That is, how is it possible? And this is one that I've never seen anyone be able to explain away in any case. How is it possible that someone could have made a prophecy like that, which completely goes against what anyone at that time would have thought? Because it's something that takes a long time to occur. It's not something that someone could have just worked out unless it was through divine revelation. And this is what our proof is here. That Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was divinely informed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these two prophecies I've chosen, but there are many others also. I feel these two are perhaps the most convincing. The third, so we spoke about 4 Quranic arguments, 2 arguments from the prophecies of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then just a general argument from likelihood which we can make. We can look at the character of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That which person in history could have been, okay, let's look at the achievements of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the space of 23 years, he transformed the entire Arabian Peninsula from being polytheists to being muwahidun, to believing in Tawheed. He transformed a group of people who the entire world looked down upon as being backward. He transformed them into an empire that would conquer the world. In 23 years, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam achieved so much. His character was so amazing. All of that is a proof in and of itself. And so if we look and we list the character traits of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this in itself can prove to people that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a true prophet. If we look at the detail and beauty of the Sharia itself, that it prohibits you from things like alcohol, which are destructive. It helps you to read your salah and connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It basically helps you to run your life in such a way that it's not possible that one human being could have come up with the Sharia on his own. It has to be from a divine source, that such a structured, beautiful way to run your life cannot be the workings of one man. It has to be from a divine source. So we look at how Islam aligns with our fitrah, that we want to believe in a God, we want to believe in one God. We understand that we can connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in certain ways. So everything about Islam like that fits so well with logic and makes so much of sense that it's so unlikely for it to have been the doings of one man. It has to be from divine revelation. So this is an argument from likelihood. You can tweak it as you wish. You can add different arguments from there, and you'll have to obviously do further reading, but it's just to give you an idea of a certain argument that you can make. So that's going to end the subject on when it comes to proofs. So we discussed 3 proofs for the existence of God, with the argument from fitrah, the argument from complexity or design, and the cosmological argument. Then we went into four arguments from the Quran and 2 arguments from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and another argument from likelihood that we can tweak ourselves. Now we're going to look at a very, very important topic, which is morality. Is it subjective or objective? So what does that mean? If someone comes today and he steals something, so I'll tell him what you did is wrong, it's immoral. But how do I decide what's right and what's wrong? What criteria do I use to decide this is right and this is wrong? So that's what we want to touch at today. Because atheists often will come and say, this is immoral about Islam. This is not right about Islam. But what basis and what guide are they using to decide what's right and what's wrong? So for us, it's simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this is right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this is wrong. So therefore we know and we can decide this is right, this is wrong. An all-powerful being, an all-knowing being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us, so we know. Right, easy. But now look at the atheist, the person who doesn't believe in God. What will he say? How will he decide, example, whether riba is wrong? How is he going to decide that? Maybe he can say, okay, we'll have an election. If most of the people say it's right, it's right. If most say it's wrong, it's wrong. Now that's so subjective, it can change at any time. Because you look at it 100 years ago in the West, it was immoral to wear a miniskirt. And now, it's like the norm. Why? Because the morals are changing over time, because they don't have a fixed way of deciding what's right or what's wrong. How are you going to decide? I say, if you use the majority to decide, then you're going to have to say that what Hitler did in Nazi Germany was correct, because the majority of the country of Germany felt that it was fine, so what they did was correct then. So you can't use the majority to decide. Maybe you can say, some atheists will say, no, we'll use the harm principle. If you harm someone, then it's wrong. If you're not harming someone, it's okay. So they'll use this, where they use this very commonly in the argument of homosexuality. They say, what you got against a homosexual person? They think he's not harming anyone, therefore it's fine, it should be okay. And that's not even correct in the first place, because there's a higher likelihood of STDs, there's a higher likelihood of so many diseases, there's a higher likelihood of fighting and destruction to any children that they adopt. So there's so many harms that come with it, right? But just assuming that they're right, that homosexuality, there's no harms attached to it, so they'll say, okay, they're not harming anyone else, they are true consenting adults, so what is wrong with what they're doing? So now if you use, again, this is a very dangerous line of thinking, because now if you ask them, okay, Allah protect us, a human being with a man with his mother, a man with his sister, incest, what's wrong with that then? There's two people, they agree with it, they're not harming anyone, so you'll have to say incest is correct. And you will find many atheists saying that yes, incest is fine. Take it one step further. Okay, you and your dog, Allah protect us again, you and your dog, you are the animal. The animal's okay, you okay, so what's wrong? You're not harming anyone else, so it should be okay. And you will find many atheists saying that it's okay on debate. In debates, there have been atheists who are saying, yes, I can't say there's anything wrong with bestiality. So imagine the dangerous line this takes you down when you don't have a source for morality, when you don't have a guideline and a criteria to say, hey, this is right, this is wrong. You don't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you in your life decisions in deciding what's moral or immoral. You're going to go down a very, very dangerous path. And the way that we are going to use this is, whenever an atheist tells us, no, slavery is immoral, or this is immoral, or jihad is immoral, we're going to ask him, how do you decide what's moral or immoral? Give me your basis for deciding what's immoral. Whatever reason he gives you, whatever criteria he gives you, ask him what's his proof for that. There's no proof for it. So at the end of the day, an atheist is someone who does not have a guidance from a creator, can never say something is right, can never say something is wrong. Just remember that their morality is subjective. It's a very important concept to understand. Once you understand this and you're able to use this effectively, no atheist can ever tell you, oh, but what Islam did here is not right, because they don't have a grounds to stand on for this. So remember this, that we have objective morality in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can tell us this is right or wrong, and we know. So for us, we don't need to have an election or a poll to decide whether riba is right or wrong. We'll say riba is wrong because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us it's wrong. They might have to decide, okay, ask some experts, is it right, is it wrong? And it's very likely that they'll come to the incorrect answer. So a very important topic. And now lastly, we're going to end off here, is that many people suffer from a lack of balance in their life. So if you look at the human as a whole, he has a physical element, he has a mental element, he has an emotional element, and he has a spiritual element. Many times today we extremely focused on the physical element, getting physical pleasure. We focused on the intellectual element also. We want to read more, we want to know more, we want to get we want to encompass as much information as we can. But we completely neglect the emotional part of having friends, having a wife, having children, having parents, having a loving relationship with them, whoever it is. This brotherhood that Islam creates, it serves the function of fulfilling your emotional needs that every human being has. If you fulfill all of your physical needs, everything you want to have, all of your intellectual needs, but you don't look at your emotional needs, you don't look at your spiritual needs, at the end of the day, you're not going to feel happy, you're not going to feel satisfied. You might get along for a few years like that, but it's not going to be long lasting. So every person needs to have his emotional needs fulfilled. Spiritual needs, too many people are neglecting their spiritual needs. And when you neglect your spiritual needs, you don't have that connection with Allah, you don't understand that there's a higher power, then your body goes into an imbalance. And many people we're going to be talking to are going to have this imbalance. And we're going to need to be able to suss it out and say that, this person, sometimes I don't need to give him arguments. I just need to give him spirituality. I need to connect him to a higher power. I need to show him that he has a creator who he can just worship. And this idea in itself of having spirituality can be more convincing for some people than an entire argument. This being able to convince someone that, Islam, what it does for your emotional needs, we have a brotherhood, we'll help anyone, be it Muslim or non-Muslim, we'll help them. We are selfless people. We are taught this in Islam. Just last week, a revert came and told me that the reason he converted to Islam was when the looting happened, he saw how the Muslims were helping people. And this made him seem like, this is right. So sometimes, again, arguments are in their place. Arguments are convincing. Arguments are necessary. But sometimes just serving the need of the human being, be it spiritual, be it emotional, that will bring them closer to Islam in a way that sometimes arguments may never be able to do. So that's the last point I want to make, is that always try to make sure that the person you're talking to, you can sense where's his balance going off. And many times they will have a lack of spirituality, lack of that emotional fulfillment in their life. And sometimes that's what we need to service at times. So inshallah, that's the end of today's lesson. Any questions or any comments, inshallah, you can post it in the chat box if you're online, and on site if anyone has any questions.
Just 1 minute about the Quran. You see the miracle of the Quran. You see, my son, no, the miracle of the Quran, I don't want to give it 1400 years, I want to give it to you now. The miracle of the Quran. My son was 5 years old, he went for Umrah. At 11 years, he went for Hajj. When he came back, he went to become Hafiz al-Quran. He was in standard 4, and he left school in standard 4. He did 2 years in Ladysmith, that's why he failed there. I sent him 3 years to Raid. So he left school for 5 years. When he came back, every school, whether it was the Islamic school or the Christian school or the white school, they told, we are sorry, we can't take him to higher grade. He has to go and start in standard 4. But remember, he lost 5 years. So I was in the governing body with that Ladysmith Secondary School, and I spoke to the principal, and he's a non-Muslim. And the non-Muslim says, no, it will be hard. But I asked him one question. I told him my son went, and he studied the Quran in Arabic, not in English. From the back to the front, he has by-hearted it. Can you tell me what maths is going to be for him? The principal looked at me and he says, don't send him tomorrow to school, send him the next day. And I'll tell you that power of that Quran made my son go to standard 8. All other children left school, but my son carried on, finished metric and is a graduate today and Hafiz. That's the miracle of the Quran. Why do we fright to tell them about the Quran? This is the unfortunate part. It is so powerful that he went to that. The Muslims couldn't even believe it. They took their child out. Jazakallah.
We use the argument of intelligent design to say that something was created by a higher power. Then who created that higher power? Because in philosophy, you have what you call contingency theory.
Yes, yes.
That my existence is contingent upon my parents' existence.
Yeah.
Their existence is contingent on their parents' existence. And you can carry on until you get to this higher power. And you can't go any further if you say that he wasn't created by another creator. Then the reason for that being's existence lies within that being itself. So how do we deal with that?
So this similar question comes up in many different ways. So it comes up, if we're talking about the cosmological argument, we say that everything that begins to exist needs a creator. Then someone there will ask, okay, but who created God? But there it's easy to explain, because we said everything that begins to exist has a creator. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never begins to exist. So that sort of reasoning does pop up. But here, you're talking about the argument from contingency. So the fact that we have things, necessarily we have to have a dichotomy here. Either we have things that are necessary or things that are contingent. So contingent things are things that could have existed some other way. It's possible for them. So if I look at this laptop, it could have been slightly bigger, it could have been slightly smaller. Therefore, it had to have something which decided that it would be this way. So that's one way you can look at a contingent thing. And that's the way I prefer to look at the definition of a contingent being. If we look at, so the fact that everything around us is a contingent, all of these contingent things have to come to one necessary being. And this is what you're talking about, a necessary existence. A necessary existence is defined as something that just necessarily exists. Now, if something, we never made the claim that everything that exists needs an explanation. We either made the claim that everything that begins to exist needs an explanation, everything that could have conceivably existed some other way, that needs an explanation, everything that exhibits change, that needs an explanation, but something that is simple in the sense that it's not made up of parts, it never exhibits change, it could have never conceivably been some other way, something like that never ever needs something to give rise to its existence, because it in itself is a necessary existence. So that's how we generally look at it when we talk about these arguments. I think it all goes back to what's our definition of contingency and our definition of necessity. If we define those terms correctly, it will be much easier now when we go to the question of, okay, so why does the necessary being exist? The definition of a necessary being here is necessity of existence. And it is being posited because there has to be an explanation for all the other contingent things. So if you posit that a necessary being needs an explanation, then you're going to have to now commit the fallacy of saying that it's in some place or the other, something doesn't have an explanation. Because you need something to explain everything that we have around us. And if you are not going to pin this on a necessary being, you're going to have to then say, well, certain things don't need an explanation for their existence. So it's like you're caught between these two things now. And for us, I think it's very, very obvious that we cling fast to the principle that everything that has changed, everything that could have been another way, needs an explanation for its existence. There must be an explanation. So without going too much into depth, maybe we can discuss it further later. That's the way I view such an argument.
Many times when we're engaging with the Christians about religions, this part here is always coming, but myself, I just wanted, maybe you can help me out on it. Many times when we're discussing religion in general, I find this question all the time. How is it in the Injil, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not mentioned, but in the Quran, many verses in the Quran, Nabi Isa, that they claim that they're following him, is been mentioned.
Yeah.
So maybe can you clear for me something that will help me, that when they ask that question, maybe I can touch on it to say no. Our Rasul also is been mentioned in the Injil. Jazakallah shukran.
I think one nice way to answer them also is to say, well, in the Injil, in the Old Testament, in Musa alayhi salam scripture, it doesn't mention Jesus, but in Jesus scripture it mentioned Moses. You understand what I'm saying? In the Torah, there's no mention of Jesus there, but in the New Testament there's a mention of Moses. So it doesn't, firstly we can tell them, so what does that? That doesn't prove anything, The fact that one is mentioned here, one is not mentioned here, it doesn't necessarily prove anything. If you have a problem with, that Isa alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran, but Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not mentioned in the New Testament, then the same thing can be said that, in the Old Testament, Jesus is not mentioned by name, but in the New Testament, Moses is mentioned. So it doesn't mean that Moses is greater than Jesus. We can't judge based on that. That's number one. Number two is that when it comes to the Injil, the New Testament that they have in front of them, this is not the exact Injil that was revealed to Isa alayhi salam. So we don't even know, what could have been the contents of the actual Injil. And the third point is that although Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the New Testament is not mentioned by name, but there's a lot of indications given towards him. And after the session, I'll show you some of the verses where he talks about, I will send to you a comforter in the New Testament, and various other verses which indicate that there are prophets coming after. And Jesus clearly said that when prophets come after, you should test them and see which ones are correct and not correct. So there will be prophets coming after. So I think if you use that three-step process, the first is to speak about the Old Testament, why Jesus is not mentioned there. So now you know what you're going to say to that. Second step is you can say that, this is not the actual Injil that was revealed to Isa alayhi salam. This was written by John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It was written by them. It's not the actual revelation to Jesus. Nabi sallallahu name could be there. And thirdly, Nabi sallallahu is mentioned, but by indication. And that's the thing. And obviously the last point, and this is the main thing, that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is mentioning, Isa alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran because we as Muslims have to believe in all the Anbiya. So these are Anbiya that passed, and Anbiya, the Quran is addressed to the Christians and Jews as well. So the Christians believed in Isa alayhi salam, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about Isa alayhi salam. But the New Testament or the Injil that was revealed to Jesus is for his people there. It's not for us as Muslims. So there's no actual reason for Nabi sallam to be discussed in detail there. So I think if, just those four as a conglomeration of arguments, but we'll discuss it in detail in the next four or five sessions. We can discuss that in detail. All right, sir.
إلهي أنت الحليم العليم العظيم الرحيم المجيد الرشيد الشهيد اللطيف